So this week I got to interview none other than my good friend Adam Neely. Adam and I got into so many cool things, I'm actually going to split up the interview, but as usual, you can look in the description and find hyperlinks to different sections of the video, as well as a link to t-shirts in case you would like to support the channel and buy a comfy t-shirt. So here's my interview with Adam Neely. Let's start out nice and easy. Who killed jazz and why didn't it happen sooner?
It was Wynton Marsalis and those damn traditionalists in the 1980s. They killed jazz. They killed the meaning of jazz. No. Who killed jazz? That's a great question. Mr. Burke.Lee.
Hey.
I don't think it's dead. I think that Jacob Collier had a important insight when he said that jazz is more kind of a form of, it's like a kind of musician rather than a style. You're a jazz musician if you improvise and you use the blues and you play riffs and you jam in a way that's very different than like classical musicians or people who are just rock musicians and that's all they do, but they aren't like, they don't go to the session and, you know, improvise, I guess. So I think it's much more of a style of musician rather than a style of music, if that makes any sense.
It does, and I wasn't expecting such an insightful answer.
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry.
No, that's great.
I'll give you some shitty answers. Don't worry, I got them.
Well, that's nice, actually, because it does remind me of the first few times that I met someone, and I was like, yeah, just play something. And they're like, no, what do you want me to play? It's like, yeah, just do your own thing.
Yeah, just
like,
just
so
play.
what does that mean?
Just go, create art right now, and that's
do what you'd want to do. Like, I don't know how else to frame it. Yeah, that was an interesting.
Yeah, like the value of a jazz education, whatever that might be, whether it's just literally you go and play with jazz musicians all the time, or you go and study formally, is the ability to just like, I'm going to hang out and like, let's noodle over a thing. And incorporate some of that vocabulary, which has been developed over the past 100 years, and use that as a means of expressing yourself in the moment, no matter what. Like I can pick up my bass. I'm not going to because it's all the way over there, but I could pick up my bass and improvise something. And I think that's what a jazz musician is versus somebody who doesn't have that, just like, sure, let's just create now. Let's do it. Together and have a vocabulary to create together right now. And I think that's the real dividing line, honestly, which is, you know, I'm not sure if it's useful to have that dividing line, but that is, I think, what it means now. Because jazz music can mean anything, but it's really just like that approach to, are we going to create something together right now? Yeah.
That makes sense. I also like the idea that, depending on how you punctuate that sentence, is a jazz musician is something who could pick that up and do something with it, but it's all the way over there.
Yeah, it's next time. It was like, you know, it's fine. Let me drink some coffee. I'm out of coffee. Damn it. All right. I'm out of the substance.
So I'm curious. You've basically done, short of everything, I don't know, almost everything. And I know that sounds like an old country song of like, I've seen everything and I've been everywhere. But, you know, you've done a lot of different things. What made you, was it just curiosity that got you into, like, you've been a producer, you've been a writer, you've been an arranger, you've been a big band arranger, you've been a mixer, it's so many different things, backing musician, original band thing. Was it just your passion for everything, or how did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm naturally a very curious person because I want to know how things work. I want to know how you put together a thing. And if I don't know how to do it, I kind of want to try and figure it out myself. Honestly, and this is really the big thing, is it was kind of out of necessity a lot of the time to try and wear as many hats as possible. You know, we lived together, to give some context, to give some background here. We lived together for 5 years alongside Sean Crowder of Sungazer. And, you know, we were starving musicians in New York City at the turn of the 2010s. And it's kind of if you look back at it, it's somewhat of a romantic view on what music was, or like what we were trying to do. We were trying to play music and play our original music, but also be backing musicians for other people. And we very quickly realized that, you can't really rely on other people to mix your record and produce your record and do a lot of other things, because you just don't have the money to do it. You're getting by on, $50 gigs and teaching private lessons, and there's very little money. So, hey, well, you just have your copy, your potentially cracked copy of Ableton Live, and you just start working on it. It was partly out of necessity, partly out of kind of hubris, like, how hard could it be? Turns out it's very hard, very difficult, but immensely rewarding. And I feel like every time that I step into a new role, I learn something that I can apply to what I was doing before. And it's all this like web of interconnected musicality, which is one of the things I really enjoy about the process. Like, I like doing all this stuff because it all basically makes me a better musician. And I think, some people get overwhelmed with it for sure. I have to do everything now. I kind of like it as a challenge. I get to do everything now because everything will feed back into just me as a better musician, me as a more understanding musician about the world and how music works. So
it seems like you're also approaching it from very limited expectations, because you're not like, I imagine you'd feel I have to do it now if you have to like win an award for your mixing then or whatever, have any kind of recognition, versus I just got to get this shit done. Like,
yeah, it's all I got to get the shit done. At some point it would be nice to do it well or right, and I know how to do things okay. But I don't stake my ego on it. It was mainly just like, I'm curious. And a lot of times musicians stake their ego on how well they can do something, rather than does it serve a function? Like, does it serve me? Does it serve the world around me? Rather than like, how good does it reflect on me? I'm not going to win any awards for any of the side project things that I do, but I like doing them. So,
what do you hang your ego on, if anything?
That's a great question, and it's a deep one. I was reading a psychological profile for people with narcissistic personality disorder. And okay, maybe I have that a little bit. And one of the things that was really, it kind of struck me was like, needs to be exceptional at things because to feel any kind of self-worth. And that was an interesting one for me, because I love being good at things. I love like practicing, and I love being good at things to seek validation from others. Like, unless you are good at something, you don't have like self-worth. And I was like, that hits a little bit too close to home to be completely wrong. And I'm not self-diagnosing myself with narcissistic personality disorder, but that was an interesting thing to see that reflected back in words. And where do I get the ego? I mean, I feel like that's just a personal growth thing, is like to constantly try and divorce my own self-worth from my work. And as a musician, that's very difficult to do, because so much is wrapped in your ability to express an idea through your instrument and through artistic expression, through songwriting. And dear Lord, like it's really difficult to divorce the two. And I think it's important, just as a growth as a human, to do that, to have the work be something that you do, but not rely upon that for validation. And it's easy to get wrapped up in that.
Right. Yes, I guess it's much more easy, like waiting tables, being like, wow, you're a really good waiter, being like, I don't care.
Yeah.
And then
yeah, exactly. I don't perfect.
Like,
wow, you're really good
I'm
at
not
guitar.
going to get fired.
You're really good at guitar. That's amazing. This is who I am now.
You really think so?
You really think so? Yes, that's the experience that literally every musician has. And I think it's just important to stop having that be the experience at some point, because it goes down some dark roads. Because there will be somebody who is better at guitar than you, believe it or not. And then that gives you the impression that they are a better human than you. And they probably aren't. But, you conflate the two very, very quickly. And there's such like moral language used to describe abilities on instruments. Like if somebody is like faking their guitar part, that's seen as like they are a bad person, when it's just like, well, they faked a guitar part. Like, can you fake, I don't know, can you fake waiting a table well? Yes. You know, waiters put on a smile all the time, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's a bad analogy. Terrible analogy, excuse me. But
I'm just trying to think of someone going like, hello, sir. And you're being like, you're ruining this experience.
Could you just play guitar instead? Yeah.
Huh. You've also been, like you initially wanted to go into music education and like be a professor.
Yeah. Do you know,
when did that switch? Because it doesn't sound like you're like, oh, this is the number one purpose that I'm trying to like reach.
Yeah. So I maybe still eventually want to teach at the university level, but it was really twofold. One, I just like the intellectual curiosity of exploring different things, you know, like exploring different music and really getting into that intellectual, like wonkish headspace. I love that. But two, it was really a financial goal more than anything. The idea that you could teach and explore your artistry and be safe in that is a strangely alluring goal for any working musician. And, you know, when you're teaching privately and teaching private students, it would be really nice to have some degree of regularity to that. It would be something that feels safe and away from the vagaries of the market. Like, you know, I don't want to hustle every $100 gig and try and build a career around like these little jazz gigs going everywhere. And, you know, teaching at the university represents job stability. One of the very rare examples, at least in the before times, before COVID, of job stability for musicians. And that, you know, I come from a somewhat musical family. My mom is a voice teacher and all of her brothers are musicians. And I knew the struggles going into it. I knew what being a musician would be. And I was like, well, I need to get that job security. And being a university professor, that's how I would get the job security. So that's, I guess, what I'm going to do eventually. And then it turned into a very different thing. It turned into YouTube, which has afforded me job security in other ways. But yeah, that was why. It wasn't like some high-minded music education thing. I guess I like teaching. That's good. But it was really like, no, I want to like be able to eat regularly.
Yeah, I guess it was interesting. I probably came into that desire the same way. I like teaching just fine, but I never thought of reporting to a college to do so. I didn't mind private lessons. I don't mind driving to a private whatever. And then I found out the security in the job, and I was like, oh wow, that sounds great.
Yeah, exactly. It's like this is how you survive. And I can't emphasize that enough to people who aren't musicians. Like survival and just how you like organize your life is just how do you do it? How do you like chart that course? And university teaching positions looks damn fine, because even if you're in like a big touring act, again, in the before times, the tour ends, and then what do you do? And, you know, the sheer security of being able to teach year after year. Yeah, of course, there's exceptions with adjunct positions, but the sheer security of knowing like, well, next year I'll still have work, and the year after that, I'll definitely still have work. But even Broadway musicians, which is another very stable career choice, because you have work night after night, the show will close eventually. And then what do you do? Hope there's another show that opens? Well, yeah, that is a viable option. But, you know, that it doesn't end up being something that you want to rely on. And I always wanted to rely on something more regular than hustling random ass gigs. And besides maybe Broadway, touring musicians and big pop acts, university teaching positions that's how you would do it.
So you mentioned making trying to not have to rely on $50 to $100 gig, making a career out of that. You've done a lot of backing musician work.
Yes.
How did you go about pricing yourself, and did you even ever bother?
That's a good question, because a lot of people want to know that. How much should I charge? It's tricky. If you want to make yourself the backing musician, the cat, the guy to call, it also, I feel like, depends on the city too, because we did a million of these $50 gigs. That were, not to discourage anybody from offering $50 to anybody if that's all they can afford, but you can't make a living doing that.
No.
But pricing is tricky because you also want to make relationships with people who might not be able to afford lots of money to pay you. And those are your friends. And the joke in New York City is that music in New York City is just a bunch of musicians handing each other $50 bills. That's really what it is, because money has to come from somewhere. And usually it's a musician with some kind of bartending gig or some kind of gig away from music that is siphoning off the very little money that they're making back into the musical community. It's not, coming from record sales or anything big that might come out of LA. No, it's literally just people paying each other from their minimum wage jobs. So you have to have some degree of realistic expectation of how much you can make within a market and how much you should charge your friends and your compatriots and your musical tribe when you're being a backing musician. And usually the thing that I found is you should choose gigs if all anybody can afford is $50 or $20 or $5. Choose gigs that will feed you in some way, that will make you musically more enriched and make you just, gigs that you want to play. Big band gigs are one of my favorite things to cite, because a big band gig, a jazz big band gig is 18 musicians. Nobody can afford to pay 18 musicians, their proper wage of $200 for the hit. That would be insane. So everybody is getting paid $5 and maybe a drink ticket. And everybody is saying yes to the gig because they're get to play a big band gig, and that's fun. There's always this trade-off between artistic desire to play a gig and also the desire to eat. And this is why there's a starving artist thing, because you always have to go back and forth between the two. And I've just found for myself that I can't do the backing musician thing unless it's good music, really. But that took a long time to get to that point.
Well, yeah, I remember over time, yourself, myself, Sean, getting a little more and more annoyed over time at gigs that would get paid $50, but then it would be, and another rehearsal's added. And the person we're playing for doesn't practice themselves, so it never gets any better. And then, one thing or another. And you're like, the price raised on those things until it was just pay me or I can leave. And it's just a waste of time. And then at that same time, having gigs that we really enjoyed with people we liked and being yeah, it's fine. Drink ticket's fine.
Yeah. There was an artist that we worked with for a second that she was paying us $50 a gig. And it felt like that. It felt like a total waste of time, because the music wasn't getting better. We were just we know the music. She was calling rehearsals for no reason other than because she wanted to rehearse. And it was such a drag. And then eventually I was just hey, pay us $100 a gig maybe. And then we were all fired. That was fun. But you find characters like that very early on in your career as a backing musician. And you have to really make sure that you are still making music that you want to make, because you can get jaded so fast, especially once you start getting to weddings and things, which do pay very, very well. But then, you forget to make any kind of music with anybody. And it's just a drag after a while. But yeah, you got to learn eventually when to say no. Eventually. pay your dues in the beginning, but it's nothing sustainable. Nothing in the beginning is ever sustainable. Know when to say no.
I do like the wedding bands with, I guess, younger or just not jaded musicians, because then it ends up like, oh, this is like a very enthusiastic cover gig.
Yeah, so we played a couple gigs with this wedding band in New York, and it's a fun wedding band, and I was did music directing for them for a little bit. And it was a great experience, I think, for a lot of us in that scene and a lot of people, a lot of young musicians in New York, because it was all these like really talented young musicians and very high energy, and people who just wanted to play and shred over like Bruno Mars and all that stuff. And it was, musically, it was kind of fun. It paid very well. It was incredibly exhausting, though, those days where loading in and loading out and driving out to the Hamptons and whatever. It was just like a whole thing. But it was definitely a step up, I would say, from some of those early New York gigs that we played at Sullivan Hall and what's some of the other ones?
Sullivan Hall's another one, and National Underground.
Yeah,
there's these places that when they're like, oh, music venues are closing, and then there's a couple where you're like, I don't really mind.
Yeah, no, they deserve. Please close. Like COVID did some good things.
No, Sullivan Hall closed a while before COVID. I know. Kenny's Castaways also.
Kenny's Castaways. Damn. Okay. Yeah. Damn. That's another one. Where's some other crazy ones? What was the Tiki Bar like on Avenue B? Do you remember that?
Otto's Shrunken Head.
That was kind of fun.
That place is very still around.
Is it? Okay, cool. Good. I mean, there's some really, really wretched dive venues that are not good and treated the musicians like shit. And, every city has that. And it is a badge of pride to go through and play, in the trenches. But, at some point you turn 30 and then you're like, I paid. I know that. I don't need to do that anymore.
Right. I don't need, was it C-grade shrimp nachos anymore?
Oh, God.
There's no way that's a good... I don't need the ceiling to fall into the stage.
Oh, what was that? That was a Bushwick venue, right? You played
that
with...
was... yeah. It was... I forget. But, yeah, that did happen. And it's like, well, as long as it doesn't hit the electricity...
Well, okay, so what's interesting is there's a kind of a culture clash, because there was all these DIY Bushwick Brooklyn venues for a while, like Glasslands or whatever. But then even stuff... that was a cool venue. But even stuff like further out. And it was, very much catering to this indie DIY scene, these artist types that are just like, very punk rock kind of thing, aesthetic, just like make noise and just like be part of this creative scene. And then you have the mercenary folk like you and I who are like playing with some singer-songwriters, and we think that we're like developing this backing band and backing musician, professional aesthetic kind of thing. And when we're forced to play those kinds of venues because we're getting paid, then it's this like the two things don't really work together, because we think that we're developing touring musician chops and, going to play venues like Mercury Lounge and then doing these mid-level tours. And that's kind of the end goal. But then we're playing, I don't know, one of those basically illegal venues out in Brooklyn. And everybody's like, what the hell are you doing, man? I'm getting paid $50 for playing professional bass guitar. It was a weird thing we were doing for that first year or so.
What are you doing? I'm investing in my success, I think. Growing as an individual, one plate of nachos at a time.
Here, try the sangria that we made ourselves, that we definitely don't have the license to sell you. But here, it's $3.
Oh, that basement. Yeah,
that basement, right? It's a basement.
Yeah, basement with a homemade jug of wine, like a large... Yeah, it was weird. Yeah.
What was there was a Goodbye Blue Monday. That place. That was awesome. I love that place. Goodbye Blue Monday. It was a venue that you could sign up to play yourself. There was just a calendar that you would just write in your name and you could play there. But, it was like a noise electric cello quartet followed by, pop singer-songwriter, followed by, I don't know. It was a very, there was no curation whatsoever, but it was glorious. I love that place.
Yeah, if you have an appreciation for the strange, like, then, if you liked, like, I don't know, Twin Peaks or something, or Mulholland Drive, then you'll like this place.
Yeah.
If you like a David Lynch movie, then yeah, you're in on Goodbye Blue Monday.
It definitely doesn't exist anymore, but
No.
all the venues we're mentioning closed 5 years ago, but